So welcome to the 31st class on Touching a City's Soul. This is the book that we're doing. Whoops. Well, now I have on my, I think if I go out of the thing, you'll see it. Touching a City's Soul. It's a collection of teachings of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe on when he came to visit Chicago. So in Hebrew, it's called Bikur Chicago, actually, the visit to Chicago, his visit to Chicago. You can order it from Kahas, KEHOT.com, kahasonline.com, or I think you can also order it from Sichos in English if people don't have it. So that's the story. Somebody usually puts it in the, I don't know if Juicy's on the phone right now and Simcha, but they usually put it right in the chat for everybody to see the link. So if somebody needs help, you can let me know. And we're on page 143. So we can, if you have the book, you can open up. I'm sorry, we're on page 145. I'm going to start a slight review from page 143. I don't think we're going to go through the whole thing inside. Just to set the tone of what's going on in this Sikha, this talk of the Rebbe's, since it's been a week, and for some people it's been a little bit longer. I know some people have been able to come on or off, or some people are joining now for the first time in a little bit of time. So this Sikha actually reads more like a mimer, we have to say, in a certain way, meaning it is very deep and complex. So cut yourself a little slack if this is the first time you're hearing this, but that's okay. It's still, your soul hears and understands, and whatever sinks in now is sinking in, and over time it will keep sinking in more and more. Right, Malka? You'll attest to that? Yes, you say that. Okay. So what the context of the Sikha is, it's Shabbos during his visit. As we've mentioned, his mother actually passes away on that Shabbos, but he doesn't find out until after Shabbos. So he's talking now on Shabbos. It also is a special Shabbos, is Shabbos Shira, Shabbos Parshas Beshalach. The Shabbos, one of the Shabbosim that has a special name, the Shabbos of song, because the song of the sea, the Red Sea, as Yashir, when the Jews crossed the Red Sea, is being said in this week's Parsha, and that's a song. And so he opens by talking about customs that are done on that Shabbos and how, special that Shabbos is, and then goes into talking about the portion of the week, and that it's like, that's why it's called a special name. And then really the rest of this talk is about the power of Torah in the world, and how the whole world was created in order for because of two firsts, Bais Rashis, the first word of the Torah, Bereshis, Bais Rashis, two firsts, the Torah and the Jewish people, and how the whole purpose of creation is fulfilled when the Jewish people are keeping Torah, and continues on in the pasuk Bara Elokim Eis Hashemayim Ve'eis Haaretz, that also retranslates that on a deeper level, because of these two firsts, Torah and the Jewish people. Bara Elokim, they reveal. Bara also means reveal in Aramaic. They reveal Elokim, the godliness that is hidden Eis Hashemayim Ve'eis Haaretz, in the heaven and earth. That through the Jewish people keeping Torah mitzvahs, the godliness that is embedded and hidden and sunken into the natural world is revealed and actualized. So it talks about that idea, and then it starts to talk about the idea that when a Jew gets an aliyah to the Torah, when he gets called up for an aliyah to the Torah, and the blessing over the Torah, there's an elevation that happens in his soul, all 5 levels of the soul and all 4 worlds of creation, because there's like the union of the Jew and the Torah at that time. And then it feels like he's sort of digressing a little bit, but talks about this. He's going to get back to this idea of what does it mean that there's an elevation of the soul, the 4 worlds. That's going to be like his summarizing statement when we get to the end of this. Sikh is going to say, and that's all this stuff that looks like was a digression. That's why we know that this is what happens when a Jew gets an aliyah to the Torah. But goes on to talking about the soul of the person, and what the nature of the soul of the person is, similar to the nature of a candle. that the flame always rises and wants to looks like it wants to jump off the candle and go back to its source. And that's similar to the soul, that it wants to sort of leave the body and cleave to Hashem. But then it sort of emphasizes this idea of nature. What does it mean, the nature of the soul? So it talks about how the nature of the soul comes from the soul's faculty of Chachma, which is the first of the 10 soul powers. And then before it goes back to talk about what that means, explains that Torah uses language that a person can understand. So it says the nature of the soul, even though nature it doesn't really apply to the soul, but we use language that a person can understand, and the Torah uses language that a person can understand, and there's actually two ways that it describes how the Torah explains what a person can understand. And one is that it talks in the wording of people, and one is that it uses words that appease the ear, what the ear can understand. And these two represent two different levels of revelation of godly light. Medaber b'lashon b'nei adam, that it speaks in the language of a person, means that the actual idea is being transmitted in its entirety. Whereas when it says that it speaks in a way that appeases the ear, it means that it's being condensed and lowered and I don't want to say dumbed down, but like maybe dumbed down a little bit so that we can understand it. So it's like two different levels of explanation, and then goes into this idea, which is that we have an obligation to understand as much as we can, meaning Torah explains things in these two different ways so that we can understand, and we have an obligation to understand as much as we can understand, because there's a verse that says, know this day and take to your heart that Havaya is Elokim, in the heavens above and upon the earth below. There is nothing else. And Chassidus and the Rambam, so both the esoteric aspects of Torah and the exoteric parts of Torah, emphasize the necessity, imperative, and responsibility, how's that, for knowing that there's a God and learning Torah and understanding it's the best of our ability, which is what everybody here is doing. So give yourselves a pat on the back. And at the same time, then it talks about that, how do we do this? There's two different ways. The next quote talks about this idea that Kel Deus Elokim, that God is a God of Deus Havaya, that a God is it's a plural word of language, of knowledge, that we have to understand God. There's two different ways to understand God, and they're called Das Elyon and Das Tachton, the supernal knowledge and the lower knowledge, and that these two levels of knowledge represents the higher level of knowledge sort of represents spiritual divinity, from sort of like godly perspective on the world, and the lower knowledge represents, Das Tachton represents like human beings perspective. So from the higher perspective of knowledge, from the Das Elyon, what's real is God, and what's sort of imposed upon that is the physicality. And from our perspective, from Das Tachton, what's real to us is the world, and we have to sort of search for God and find God. And at the same time, doing that, looking in the physical world, trying to understand godliness and where godliness is hidden and hinted to in the physical world, with all of those different ways that God makes himself revealed, even if it's, so to speak, dumbed down, that acts as a prelude and exercise. It exercises us, it makes us more fit to understand, to see the godliness and to understand and to get towards the higher level of understanding. We have to, even the lower perception can lead to a higher perception, or at least somewhat of a more deeper lower perception. And we know another verse that says, from my flesh I behold Hashem, ibsari echsa, that we use the physical world as a parable to understand godliness and to understand the godliness that's submerged within the physical world. And Chassidus sort of teaches us that and helps us to see that and understand that. And that's a summary of what we've done until now, basically. Okay. Are we okay? Okay.
I have a question.
Okay.
Back at the beginning of the
Uh-oh.
review, the two firsts, Torah and the Jewish people, are those considered firsts because it was the first with the creation of the world? This was the first time that those things were brought into being. Like, how are we considered? How is it that Jewish people are considered a first?
The Jewish soul and the Torah preceded the creation of the physical world. They were first in the sense that they were the purpose of creation. The first thing to sort of like come out of the godliness that you can't distinguish anything except for God, the first something that came out of that distinguishable. We're retranslating the first verse of the Torah, Bereshis bara Elokeinu es hashamayim v'haaretz, on a mystical level. So Bereshis means in the beginning. We're dividing it up into two words, Bais Reshis, because of the two firsts. Bara Elokeinu, you reveal godliness in the heavens and earths through Torah and the Jewish people, through that unit.
So that came before Torah, and the Jewish people came before everything else?
Correct. The souls of the Jewish people and the Torah was the beginning of, was like the purpose of creation. It was like it was the purpose of creation, and they preceded the physical creation.
Thank you.
Okay, we ready to go on to the new information? Are any more questions? Or looks like Carolyn has a question. No.
I do, but I can't. I don't know if I could put it into words because it's in my head.
Okay, well, eventually.
So those are the two firsts. But the idea of having so God's idea is that came from Hakma to create two firsts. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, Chachma is much later on.
Okay, much later on. So God had wanted to create a physical world, and then came the two firsts.
Yeah, I guess maybe you could say it like that. He
desired
to create a world. He desired to create a world, but that world, the purpose of the world, right? The goal of the world was for the Jewish souls to be able to be keeping the ideas of the Torah in a physical setting. So there needed to be a physical world in order for the souls to go into a body and be able to keep Torah mitzvahs in a physical world. There needed to be physicality in order for that to happen.
Okay. So somehow God had this idea of creating a lower world, so to speak, with all the physicality. And then he figured out how to do it.
I guess, yeah. He probably
probably
have to spend that much time figuring it out, but yeah.
No, but I know, but I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, right. No, you're saying it.
Is that, am I getting it straight?
Basically. Sounds like it.
Okay.
We're fulfilling God's primordial thought every time we learn Torah and do mitzvah. It's kind of amazing.
You were saying the source of fire. What's the source of fire that we're trying to go?
Talks in Chabad about its spiritual source in the heavenly realm. There's a certain layer of heaven that the source of fire is from, and that's where the flame wants to go back to, its spiritual source. Okay.
It's hard to conceive for me.
Yeah, it's hard. It is hard to conceive. I mean, the whole thing is hard. It's hard. That's what the whole point is, that it's hard, and the Torah speaks in the words of that we can understand. But and we use all these physical parables to we use analogies to try to understand the analog. It's not just for you that it's hard, I would venture to say.
Thank you for that.
It's for all of us. But we keep reviewing it. We keep going over. We keep reviewing it, and somehow it's not so much an intellectual understanding as it is like you start to sense it with your soul. But it's like you got to marinate in these ideas for a while. I think that's what I find. And the marination it just sort of like seeps in. It's almost like osmosis. It just keeps seeping in, and then you learn something else which discusses the same idea from a different perspective, and then something else mentions it, and something else, and like you start to like see this jewel from different angles, and you're marinating and marinating. It just takes time. That's what I find anyway.
So, Chaya, one more clarification. So, if the souls of the Jewish people in Torah preceded the physical creation, but yet there had to be a physical creation first in order for there to be some place.
Not first, to actualize it. Not first, second, or 15th or 75th.
So is it like we were, Torah and the Jewish people were created but not brought into the world yet?
There was no physical world yet. There was just the beginning of revelation from the essence of God.
I guess I'm trying to get a physical
world yet. There was no physicality yet.
So you're saying before there was a physicality, there was Torah and the Jewish people.
Right. Physical world is the last stage of creation, not the first.
So where were we?
Well, the same place that we are right now, subsumed within God. But there's just more layers and layers and condensation and layers and contraction and contraction. So now we're subsumed with God, and there's something physical that we can touch and feel. And
Wait,
where are we right now, for example? Where are we? Literally, where are we right now? We're in this virtual room. What? No, we're in this virtual Zoom room, right? Like, where is this Zoom room exactly? I have no idea. It's in the cloud. Do you know what that means? I don't know what that means. I mean, they can explain it, but like, what does that mean? I don't know. Is there a physical room that we're all in? No.
Oh, so you're saying, so it's like as if we were.
But we can't touch this Zoom room that we're in.
Right.
There's some sort, it's some sort of metaphysical place that we're in.
Okay.
It doesn't make it godly, but it is spiritual, meaning it's not physical, right? So as technology advances, we get really clear understanding about all these ideas, but on a godly level, meaning these are parables, right? Like the Rebbe has a beautiful sikha about how radio waves teach us such a level of, that, in the times of radios, teach us lessons about godliness, right? That there can be actual something in the room with you that you don't see unless you have a vessel that can contain it. Like the Rebbe explains that there are radio waves everywhere, but if you're not a radio, you can't pick up on the frequency and hear anything. But if you are a radio, you turn to the station and you hear voices. Where are those voices coming from? The man is someplace 1,000 miles, well, whatever, 100 miles away or whatever it is, right? He's not there, but and before you turned on the radio, that same sound wave was in the air as after you turned on the radio. The radio did not create that sound wave. It just is a receptor for it. So
is that like how
about Torah mitzvahs, godliness, right? Like godliness is everywhere. You need to be a receptor for it. You're not, right? So that was a parable that we used for. This was, I don't know, the sikh was many years ago, maybe 40 years ago, something like that, right? Now we have video chats and Zoom rooms and all sorts of other interesting things that make it even easier to understand how there can be different realities and different levels of physicality. So just extend that a little bit more to godliness in a certain way.
So it's like with the radio analogy, it's kind of like we were the radio waves and then creation came along. And and then Hashem created the world, like
Maybe,
Torah and the Jewish people.
Right, and
Or-
use it that way. That's not how the Rebbe uses it in that Sikha, but right. Yeah,
And then what you just said with the Zoom room, so it's kind of like we were in the cloud.
maybe.
And then kind of like that. I mean, that's a helpful analogy. I didn't think of that.
Fine here.
Yeah, thank you.
It's just a beginning way of understanding it. You know what I mean? Like just a beginning. Okay.
I think the problem, Debbie, I think the problem is that we cannot conceive of ourselves as being nothing. I think that's the problem, is that we cannot go back to that time before we existed, before we were even in God's thoughts. And it's very hard. It's very hard because I feel like I'm real, and it's hard to conceive of not being here, not being real.
And if you
So-
think about it from a perspective of a person who's passed away, right? When a person has passed away, their soul is just as real as it was when it was in their body. You can still communicate with the soul. That's easier for us because we had the physical person with us. So now that the physical body is not there, we know that soul, and we can imagine that soul existing in another realm. This is preceding when we're in the body. Our soul also existed, but we didn't know it yet because we didn't have a way of meeting them yet, because we are part of the physical world. But the soul existed before it got put into a body. It existed when it was in the body. It exists after it's out of that body. There's no time, there's no distinction. So it's like on a macro level, before there were bodies for the souls to be put in, there were still souls, just like after those bodies have, right? Where's Abraham's soul? I mean, it's still here. So before Avram was born, it was there, and after Avram passed away, it's still there, just like all of our loved ones, right? Same thing. So this is on a macro level. The souls of the Jewish people existed in the Godhead before there were bodies to put them into. But that was the first distinction coming out of God, because the souls are a piece of God. So there needed to be the beginning of the process of distinction, which we call revelation. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So if we're made in the image of God, what would be the image of that? In our imagination?
The image of God is many, many, many layers. The foundational one is that we have 10 soul powers, the way that Hashem puts his essence into the 10 spheres. Then those 10 soul powers our soul has, and then even our body is connected to those 10 soul powers. The 10 spheres are connected to our limbs, they're connected to our body systems, they're connected to the whole creation of the world. But that's one way that we're created in the image of God. That's the main way that we talk about how we're created in the image of Hashem. And that's why we are parable. My Hilaparcha uses that pasuk. Friedrich Rebbe quotes it here. From my flesh, I see God. What do you mean from your flesh you see God? Because we're created in the image of Hashem. So we're just, condensed, contracted, condensed, contracted. We're like a parable for that godly energy that Hashem chooses to put himself into and be known through these 10 spheres. So as we learn about ourselves, it's like those are teeny microcosm parables, ideas about how Hashem interacts with the world. That's how we're created in the image of God.
When you said souls are here, did you mean in this world or just that they existed and always exist?
Well, there's there's only one world, meaning this, that's the idea of, there's Gan Eden, there's different levels of, there's the 4 worlds are not 4 different places. They're just 4 levels of existence. The idea of going to a person's caver, right? We go to a person's grave because the soul has a stronger connection to where the body lies. In their house, they have a stronger connection. There's different places that the soul is more connected to. The place where they davened, there's different places that they're more connected to. When we go to, let's say, a tzaddik's shul, a tzaddik's office, a tzaddik's grave, but it's true to an extent for every person. That the idea of putting up a matzeva, of putting up a stone, is the idea that it's called a seat for the soul. The soul can sit there on that stone that's by the grave. So there's, and people can connect to the soul of the person even after they've passed away. And when we do a mitzvah with that person's soul in mind, we are benefiting that soul. The soul benefits from us as well. It's a two-way street. The soul is connected to us as well. So anytime we give tzedakah in their merit, we take on a mitzvah in their merit, we do an act of kindness in their merit, the soul is benefiting, because the soul cannot do those things for itself anymore. So if it's a child, let's say it's a parent who passed away, every mitzvah that child does is anyway credited to the parent, because that parent brought that child into the world. So without that parent, that child couldn't be doing what they're doing. In addition, a person specifically a child dedicates something to their parent, that's even more, stronger. But let's say it's not a parent, let's say it's a sibling, let's say it's a friend, let's say it's an uncle, let's say whoever it is, that helps the soul, that brings comfort and delight to the soul when we do a mitzvah in their merit, in their honor, in their memory. So it's a two-way street. We feel connected to them, they feel connected to us. Should we continue? On page 45? Okay. So I just want to say that the next 2.5 pages, and basically until the end, until the last 2 paragraphs from now, are probably the hardest part of the Sikha. So I'm just warning everybody. So.
Thank you for the heads up.
Yeah, exactly. You might want to have some chocolate with you while we go through this. Just to calm your nerves a little and bring us back down. It says that the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe, when he would study with Rabbi Avram Hamalach, with the Maggid of Mezrich, his teacher's son, he would study with him. The Maggid asked the Alter Rebbe to teach his son the revealed aspects of Torah, and for the Rabbi Avram to teach the Alter Rebbe the concealed aspects of Torah. He was called Rabbi Avram Hamalach, Rabbi Avram the angel, because he was on such a spiritual level. So the Alter Rebbe describes how we would eat a bagel after his learning with him, because otherwise he felt like his soul was drifting off. So he had to tie it back down to the physical world. So I think a modern day equivalent of that would certainly be chocolate. So we can.
Chaya, your warnings never fail to whet my appetite.
I know. I was just thinking that This is when everybody else is like, uh-oh, and Joni is like, yes, bring it on.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, well, here it comes. Okay, so the above brief introduction will enable us to understand the Alter Rebbe's illuminating discussion of the word teva, nature. Remember, we said that nature, earlier we said nature was borrowed, a borrowed term, and nature means something that we don't have an explanation for, and it's something we can understand what, but we can't, and how, but we can't understand why. We can explain what and how, but we can't explain why. So he says the nature of the soul comes from its faculty of chachma. The soul's nature comes from the faculty of chachma. That's what the previous Rebbe had quoted the Alter Rebbe saying about the soul. So the above brief introduction will enable us to understand the Alter Rebbe's illuminating discussion of the word teva, nature. We know that things are as they are, though without knowing why they are as they are. He mentioned that before, right? We can explain what, but we can't explain why. With regard to worldly things that are animated by natural divinity, right? That's a lower level of godliness that's submerged within nature, and we can uncover it within nature. That's the natural divinity. That's what he's calling natural divinity. We do not know what cause arouses them to be drawn toward their roots above. I think that's like what Bina was asking about the fire and being drawn to its roots above, right? In contrast, with regard to the nature of the soul, we do know that this arousal derives from the soul's faculty of chachma, because the Alter Rebbe says that the nature of the soul is from its faculty of chachma. So we know that the nature of the soul, its nature derives from its faculty of chachma. That's the first of the 10 soul powers, the first of the 10 permeating soul powers. With this statement, the Alter Rebbe positions nature in its due location, the Sphira of Chachma. That's the first of the 10 soul spheros and the first of the 10 soul powers, meaning now he's making a general statement that the the location of nature is in the sphere of Chachma. Now we're talking about in terms of the world and the order of creation. It's in the sphere of Chachma, the first of the 10 spheres that God chooses to clothe himself in. Right? The nature of the soul derives from Chachma, and therefore we know that nature of the world also derives from Chachma, right? Because we're saying that the physical world is a parable for godliness, so we understand this, which is the beginning of Seder Hishtalshalos. The Seder Hishtalshalos is the chain-like downward progression of successful stages of divine self-concealment, which results in the creation of the physical world. That's what it results in. In other words, the concealment of godliness, the more concealed the godliness is, the more physical emerges, the more physical creation emerges, right? And it feels itself ultimately to be in existence by itself because the godliness is so hidden. So nature starts in the sphere of Chachma, which is the beginning of the order of creation. Thus, whatever is vested in nature begins with the sphere of Chachma and continues with the lower spheres. So whatever exactly what he said, whatever is vested in nature, the nature of the world begins in the sphere of Chachma. That's the first point of the Seder Hishtalshalos, and continues with the lower spheres. Now, there's a lot of definition above the sphere of Chachma. I mean, there's lots and lots of levels. We don't go straight from the sphere of Chachma and above it is all of a sudden the essence of Hashem. There's still lots and lots of definition between that and the essence of Hashem, but it's not called the order of the creation of the physical world. That's what we're saying. Above that is not the physical world. Hence, whatever is higher than the sphere of Chachma is called supernatural. Not supernatural in the English term like spooky or something. Supernatural meaning literally above nature. It's above the order of what we call nature. In other words, it doesn't have to play by the same rules as nature. There could be something that's above nature. It could reveal itself in the natural world too. I mean, we call that a miracle, right? The miracle source is above nature. It's like a breakthrough godliness, right? It's like a peek behind the veil of creation. So whatever is higher than the Sir of Chachma is supernatural. Okay. Now, Tanya is the Chumash of the teachings of Chassidus. It means Tanya is called the written Torah of Chassidus. That's what it's called. Just as in the written Torah, the letters of its words are precise and the very placement of neighboring statements is significant, the same applies to Tanya. Tanya was authored by the Alter Rebbe, and it's called the written Torah of Chabad Chassidus. It's like all the basic points of Chabad Chassidus, and everything basically after that is exposition on Tanya. I mean, it doesn't necessarily say this is the explanation of Tanya, but it takes the ideas of Tanya and develops them. The same way you have the written Torah and the oral Torah. The letters of every word are precise, and one ought to invest deep thought in the godly understanding of what the Alter Rebbe is revealing to us when we study Tanya. So, in the ideas in Tanya, so the Alter Rebbe says put many, many years, according to some 20 years, into the exact wording of every word of Tanya and even one letter. So here the previous Rebbe is saying, like, the Alter Rebbe put a lot of time into writing Tanya, at least spend a lot of time trying to understand it. Every word, every letter is significant. So how does that affect us here? The Alter Rebbe tells us that the nature of the soul is the soul's chachma. That's what he tells us. The nature of the soul comes from the soul's faculty of chachma. So now we know nature in the world starts at the point of chachma as well. But he doesn't just say that, he also adds the words in which the infinite Ein Sof light abides. That even though this is the beginning of nature, and chachma is the beginning of nature, but within that nature of the soul that starts with chachma, the infinite Ein Sof light abides, which is infinitely higher than the level of chachma. The light of Ein Sof, of Hashem, abides in there, inside of that point of the beginning of the nature of the soul. Hashem's light shines in there. Hashem's light is there. At first glance, that phrase appears to be unrelated to what he's explaining at this point, namely that the soul's nature is not based on reason, knowledge, and intelligence that can be understood, but rather is beyond the grasp and comprehension of rational intelligence. And what is that higher level called? The soul's faculty of chachma. Meaning what the Alter Rebbe is trying to explain is what the soul's nature is. And he says, and the previous Rebbe on the next page is going to analyze this statement of the Alter Rebbe's in a lot of detail, in more detail. But the Alter Rebbe says that the nature of the soul is not based on reason or knowledge and intelligence that can be understood. So it's not rational. The nature of the soul is not rational because it's a piece of God. It's not rational. It's beyond the concept of rational. It's not that it's irrational. It precedes the mind, but rather is beyond the grasp and comprehension of rational intelligence, right? It's just beyond intelligence. Contrary to popular opinion in America, there are things that are higher than human intelligence. Like we suppose that to begin with. That's a given in Torah. God is higher than rational intelligence, which is why we don't understand God's ways, surprisingly enough, because God is above our understanding. So here the Alter Rebbe is saying that the nature of the soul is not based on reason, knowledge, and intelligence that can be understood. Why? Because it's beyond the grasp and comprehension of rational intelligence. The nature of the soul is beyond the ability to understand, because the nature of the soul comes from before understanding was created, so to speak. The mind is also a creation. So the soul precedes rational thought. So you can't completely grasp a soul with rational thought, because it's like Alter Rebbe gives an example in Tanya. He says, you can't say that this idea, that you can, pick up this idea with your hands, because ideas don't have physical dimensions that you can pick them up, right? So the soul can't be understood with rational thought completely because it's before rational, it precedes rational thought. It's a level that's higher than rational thought, so you can't completely understand it. It's the vessel of rational thought is not a vessel that is in tune with the soul's nature. We can understand some things, but we can't understand the soul's nature. However, what is that higher level called? It's called the soul's faculty of Chachma. That's where the nature of the soul comes. So the previous Rebbe says, okay, this is enough. We understand the point the Alter Rebbe is trying to make. The soul's nature comes from its faculty of Chachma, and that's why we can't completely understand the soul's nature. We got it. Great. Let's go on to the next idea. But instead, the last half of that sentence is the Alter Rebbe says, in which the infinite Ein Sof light abides. That seems to like swerve us off our course. Like, why is that? What does that phrase have to do with what we're talking about? So now the previous Rebbe says, actually that phrase, of course, right? Because he just told us every phrase in Tanya is explicit, very important, every word, every phrase, where it's placed, why it's placed, everything is very specific. So actually, the previous Rebbe says, however, by adding those few words in which the infinite Ein Sof light abides, the Alter Rebbe explains to us 10 concepts. We learn 10 fundamental concepts about the soul, its faculty of Chachma, creation, God, everything. We learn 10 ideas from those few words that the Alter Rebbe adds in which the infinite Ein Sof light abides. We learn 10 things. Now, maybe I could say he could learn 10 things. I don't know that we ever would have gotten to these 10 things on our own, but somebody who understands Tanya and understands the Alter Rebbe's teachings and everything else, and is a great Friedrich Rebbe, sees these 10 things and now he gifts us with them. But he tells us these are the 10 things that we learn from the fact that the Alter Rebbe put these extra words. The nature of the soul comes from the faculty of Chachma, by the way, in which the infinite Ein Sof light abides. Why do you add that? Because he has 10 important things he wants us to know. At the same time, he's telling us about the nature of the soul. Okay? But he doesn't tell us how he learns it from those words, just that he learns. And he assumes, I guess, we understand, or I don't know. Number one, what do we learn? We learn that the soul's faculty of Chachma is defined by the fact that in it, the infinite Ein Sof light abides. In other words, it's not just a by the way that the infinite Ein Sof light abides in Chachma. This is its defining characteristic. It's like its pride and joy. You know, Chachma's pride and joy is that the infinite light of Ein Sof abides there. So it's like we're mentioning we're mentioning Chachma, the Chachma of the soul. We've got to mention that in it the infinite Ein Sof light abides, because this is like what makes it Chachma. That we could understand, I think, a little bit. I'm saying, like, okay, it makes sense. You can't mention one without the other. It's defined by that fact. So if we're going to mention it, we're going to mention this at the same time. This is what makes Chachma Chachma. So it's pretty special if that's the nature of the soul, because the nature of the soul comes from the place that the Ein Sof light abides there. So that's pretty remarkable about the soul. Like, wow, right? Number two, the Alter Rebbe is hinting to us that the soul's faculty of Chachma resembles the sphere of Chachma in the world of Atzilus, and that level of Chachma he explains in the gloss to chapter 35 of Tanya. The Alter Rebbe is hinting to us. What does that mean? The Alter Rebbe is hinting to us by saying that just like we said before, that we are created in the image of Hashem. What does it mean? That it's a parable. We're a parable for the process of creation. So the same way that the soul's faculty of Chachma, it's the soul's faculty of Chachma, but it connects to and is part of the idea of the process of creation, the Chachma in the world of Atzilus, which is the first point of creation of the physical world. So that's called the sphere of Chachma in the world of Atzilus. Atzilus is the first world of the world of Tikkun, which is the process of creation, and the Chachma is the first step in the first world. So the same way that the soul's faculty of Chachma is to the soul, sort of like what the faculty of Chachma Vatzilus is to creation. It's similar. Because the point of Ein Sof also resides in the sphere of Chachma, the world of Atzilus, which we know from Tanya. So we're drawing another parallel between creation and the soul by those words. The process of creation and the process of the soul coming into the body. Number 3, the soul's faculty of Chachma is nature, but not like the nature of the created beings of the world. That is why he first speaks of the nature of the light of a candle, and only then does he speak of the nature of the soul. The latter is also one of the things vested in nature, but it is vested in an utterly different way, because the soul's faculty of Chachma is a receptor for the infinite Ein Sof light. Because we talk about the nature of creation, and the nature of created beings is different than the nature of the soul. The nature of the soul is to want to be one with Hashem. The nature of created beings is to be drawn down. The only thing in the physical world that's drawn up to its source is also fire. So like we talked about at the time, right? Everything is drawn down by gravity. The only thing in the physical world that goes up is fire. Everything else goes down. So we're saying that even though we're using the terms like the nature, the soul's faculty of Chachma is nature, but it's not similar to the nature of physical beings. That's a different type of nature. It's more similar to the nature of fire. So the Alter Rebbe, this is the parallel between the soul being like a flame and the soul. That's in chapter 35 of Tanya. Like that explanation is elaborated on. That parallel is brought and elaborated on in Tanya in great in great detail. So saying that in that chapter, that's why the Alter Rebbe first talks about the fire, the flame of a candle, and compares that to the soul to help us understand that the nature of the soul is not like the nature of the rest of physicality, even though it's so, and why is that? Because its faculty of Chacham is a receptor to the infinite Ein Sof light. So anything that's nature is a receptor to the infinite Ein Sof light cannot be the same as all created beings, which is much more grub, much more physical. So the Alter Rebbe is helping us to understand that even though it's being called the nature of the soul, it's not similar to the nature of created beings. More if we need to, in the physical world, more if we need to have some sort of parable to understand, to help analogy to understand, think of fire. Fire is the most spiritual of all physical elements. You know, when we look at a physical creation, fire is part of the physical world, but it's more similar to a spiritual idea. Like if you try to grasp it, you can't grasp it. If you try to contain it, it goes out, right? There's like so many, you can't really hold on to fire the same way that you can't hold on to the soul. The only way you can hold on to fire is by putting something physical like a wick, a candle. Like you have to have a vessel to hold on to it. You try to grasp it by itself, you can't. So it's compared to the soul. So when we say that the nature of the soul, the Alter Rebbe is telling us, but the nature of the soul is not the nature of similar to other physical created beings. The closest we can understand is like to a flame. Why? Because it's a receptor for the infinite Ein Sof light. So that's a high level. So it can't be the same as every other physical being. Number 4, the Alter Rebbe is hinting to us that the nature of the soul, i.e., the soul's faculty of Chachma, right? That's how he defines the nature of the soul, the soul's faculty of Chachma, which is a receptor for the infinite light of Ein Sof, right? That's the whole thing that we're trying to explain why the Alter Rebbe adds that the nature of the faculty of Chachma, of the soul, which is the faculty of Chachma, which is not like the nature of other created beings in the physical world. What is it? It basically derives from Yechida, which, as you see in the footnote, right? It's the highest of the 5 levels of the soul. There's 5 levels of the soul, and the Chachma, the faculty of Chachma, which is the nature of the soul, derives from the highest level of the soul. That's where its source is, the highest level of the soul, which in turn is connected to the level of Elokus called Yachid. You look at the footnote, What does the word Yachad mean? It means unique. The term Yachad represents the transcendent level of the infinite Ein Sof light that is utterly separate from the created worlds. So the nature of the soul's faculty of Chachma comes from the Yechida of the Neshama, which is the highest level of the soul, which in turn is connected to the level of godliness, which is called Yachid, which is the highest level of godliness that's separated from the world. In other words, again, we're saying that the soul is the parable for how God interacts with the world. So it makes sense. The soul's faculty of Chachma, which in it resides Ein Sof, and that hints to us that the soul's nature comes from its highest point, which is separated from the body and creation, its source. The same way that, and that level is connected to the highest level of Hashem that's separated from the world. Same thing. That parallel level of the soul is connected to the parallel level of godliness. That's where it's connected to. Moreover, it becomes revealed not via the successfully gradated stages of Hishtalshelus, but by leaping over the lower levels of the soul, namely Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama. This is the fundamental concept in Tanya that the Alter Rebbe talks about in Tanya, that you can't get from the essence of Hashem to the physical world by a series of steps. You can't have a staircase that's long enough to get from Hashem to my kitchen countertop. It just doesn't happen. The way that it has to happen is through a series of contractions and covering over, which are called tzimtzum and hester panim, veils and contraction and veils and contraction. It's not a simple successive, it's not like one step after another, after another, after another. So too, this idea that the nature of the soul, which is the soul's faculty of Chachma, that has Ein Sof in it, resides Ein Sof in it, means that it's connected to the highest point of the neshama, which is not connected to the body. And that highest point of the neshama is connected to the highest point of Hashem, which is also not connected to the world. And this highest level doesn't become revealed in the physical world just through a series of steps. It's contractions and veilings and contractions and veilings. That's how it comes all the way down. It's not just a step-by-step process. It's not like, you do this and then you do this. It's not a physical process. It's not a chemical process. It's called process of tzimtzum and hester panim, of contraction and veiling. Number 5, even though the infinite Ein Sof light abides in the soul's faculty of Chachma, that faculty is part of nature and does not transcend nature. That's the beginning of the natural process, is the faculty of Chachma. Chachma vatzilus for the world, and Chachma in the soul for the soul. In it resides this level of Ein Sof, which is above nature and above everything and all these high things. So it's a vessel for that, and in it resides. So that's the point of connection with something that's above nature and above anything understanding. But the actual Chachma itself, the vessel, is the first step of nature, basically.
Sorry, Chaya, can we back up just a little? On number 4, it's the leaping over the lower levels of the soul. It's not just the veils and contractions and veils and contractions. Am I getting that correct? It's like what you used to say about I forgot how you did it. Step, miracle, step kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. Is that what he's talking about?
Something like that, yeah. It's not an explained step-by-step process. You can't get from Hashem's infinite light to just being the soul.
Right. So there's a gap.
Physical body.
Right. So there's a gap that we can't penetrate. We cannot conceive of.
We can't conceive of. Okay, I think we're gonna need to end here, these first 5 things. There's another 5 things that we learned from this phrase that we're probably gonna have to wait for next week to learn. And then I think we'll finish this talk, God willing, next week. I mean, if people want to review, if they can, you know, if they want to, I don't know if it will take us the whole class to finish it, but it might, depending on questions, but we'll have a review, you know, we'll review again, I think, because it's not so easy, and it's easier to understand these ideas when it's in the context of like the bigger picture. And then hopefully we'll finish these last 5 things, and then there's 4 other things he says we learn, and then he connects it back to this idea of getting an aliyah to the Torah, and then that's the end of this particular sikha. And then we go on to the next thing that he said while he was in Chicago. There's a
You should
couple of more things. There's another sikha, and then there's a letter, and then there's actually just like descriptions of other people, of like their perception of what it was like. And then there's a few other teachings of the previous Rebbe, and then we'll be finished. I can't tell you how long that will take. It could still be another couple of months, but I'm saying we are nearing the end of the Sefer.
It's great. This is great.
Yeah, it is.
Chaya,
Yeah.
you said that the highest point of the